Welcome back to the Cruise Elite podcast. What's up, Tony?
Good morning, Taylor. I'm excited about our audio talk sessions before these podcasts.
Yeah.
For the listeners, we hop on. He's got his new microphone. He's got his new preamp. He's got some acoustic panels in the room now. And, we're just training up on how to use everything and what to do. And, man, I could do that forever.
It's funny. I feel like an imposter so far, I must admit. But you're winning me over with the tech stuff. So, I've got some lights. I got some a couple of lights to play around with, and man, I'm excited about it for sure.
Selfishly, it's like I'm doing the mix and edit of the episode, and I just did the first one you did with the mic recently, and it was just like, it's like just sounds so much cozier to my ear. So
that's great.
Maybe people notice, but I notice, and it makes me happy.
Well, they notice already, like in our membership when I'm doing Thursday live calls. I do a Thursday live call at 1:00 every week, and we go over different neurology themes. And lately, we've been doing case studies, which has been really cool. And our members have noticed. They have mentioned the sound, so that's great.
Excellent.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like as a coach working with somebody, maybe a personal training client. They're working on general fitness. I'm introducing them to general kinds of fitness, and then all of a sudden I work with them long enough, and maybe I get a chance to, they come in and they're like, "Hey, my right ankle feels weird," and they haven't really had a neurology experience yet. We do something weird, and all of a sudden it opens up their mind. They're like, "Oh, that's cool. That's cool." And then before you know it, we're nerding out and getting into some of the neuro. It kind of reminds me of that. I'm like the client that you've been teaching me, and now we're going a little bit further into some of the things that before I wasn't even close to.
Yeah. Well, on this side of it, as I'm sure you know, it's quite rewarding. So
I'm glad to hear that.
To see that progress. We were texting the other day about this episode, and you mentioned like, "Hey, have we done an episode that's just like what is applied neurology?"
Yeah. It was actually Alicia who brought that up.
Yeah.
When we were talking about it yesterday or 2 days ago.
I'm sitting here, I'm like, how is that not our very first episode? Like, what am I doing?
That is so that is so me. I feel like I'm always circling back to do, more basic things. So it's kind of funny, but it is funny that we didn't start with that, but it's okay. I bet we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
I bet we're going to do it again and again. I think it's a good idea, and I'm glad we're approaching it.
Yeah. I have to admit, when I first heard the term applied neurology, I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
And neurology is such like a, excuse the pun, heady word.
Yes.
I think about like guys in white lab coats.
Yep.
Looking at brain scans and stuff like that. So,
and that's problematic, actually. Maybe we can talk about, that makes it challenging for me on several different fronts, because I think that is what people visualize. As soon as they hear the word neurology, they separate that from health and fitness. Right. And so, for example, before getting on this podcast, I put up a question box on Instagram, because I like to do several of those a week, and where people just get a chance to ask a question, and I do my best to answer what I can answer. But, one of the things that happens consistently is I get medical questions that I can't actually tackle, and so I have to kind of pick and choose. And people who have been following me for long enough kind of they know what I do. I'm a movement guy. I help people solve movement problems and pain issues through this applied neurology lens. But people who haven't been introduced to that yet, they don't know that applied neurology can be used to help them with their knee pain, or it can be used to help them improve their fitness, or to help them improve a specific aspect of their physical self, whether it's strength or balance or anything really. That's what's so neat about neuro. They haven't made that connection yet. So yeah, I think people think white lab coats, or they think, only this kind of thing can only be done in a medical setting, like clinical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually not true. Right. And that's what's so exciting about right now, is that all of this neurology stuff is starting to make its way into, I don't know, call it mainstream more. And so people like me who are passionate about movement can learn neurology and learn how to apply it in a more relatable way to goals that we all have for feeling better and moving better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with that first word you just said, neurology. You're not the guy in the white lab coat, but
Yes, in fact, I'm usually wearing my pajamas, or yeah,
stretchy
or
pants.
yeah, exactly. I'm not that guy.
So you're not the guy in the lab coat. So yeah, how would you define neurology?
Yeah. First, when we say neurology, we're obviously referring to the nervous system, the brain and the nervous system. And so everything that we do with applied neurology is using the nervous system, the brain and the nervous system, as a lens to approach any goal through. So the first part of that is we're always talking about the nervous system and the brain. But as far as defining it goes, what we have to do is put the word applied in front of neurology, which is essentially what I'm doing, what I'm teaching people to do, is applied neurology. And so here's a definition, right? This is typically what I like to say to people when we go over, what is applied neuro. So applying a stimulus on purpose repetitively to activate a desired pathway or brain structure with the intent of changing one's output. That is how I define applied neurology. So again, if you're kind of new to this language and stuff, there's questions that come up after hearing the definition, like, well, what is a stimulus? Right? And so this all now comes down to understanding what input is versus output. So one of the things I'm educating a lot about is this kind of input decision-making output loop. That when we look at applying a stimulus, or what applied neurology really is, it's this idea that we're going to apply a stimulus, which means use some sort of input, meaning the nervous system is going to sense some kind of information. And we haven't said yet what kind of information that is, because there's lots of different kinds of inputs that you could choose to apply to a person. We'll probably get into some of that stuff in this conversation. So we use an input, apply it, let's say, to the brain, the nervous system, the body, if it's easier for you to think about it that way right now. And the brain receives that input through its sensors. We'll just call it sensors right now. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's processing that occurs at the brain level. And then there is always an output as a result of the applied input. And so for our purposes, when we say output, what we mean is that performance has been changed in some way. So that could be range of motion improves, it could be balance improves, it could be pain is reduced, right? And there's a lot of different kinds of outputs that we could even discuss. And yes, pain is an output. It is really primarily a construct of the brain based on tons of different factors. But that's the kind of loop you want to visualize. There's an input, okay? And then the brain receives that input. There's processing that happens. The brain then is figuring out what to do with the information and what does it mean. And then as a result of that, there is an eventual output. And so for coaches like myself, who are doing a lot of movement things and hoping to decrease pain, That's what we're trying to achieve, is improved physical performance in some way and potentially reduced pain depending on the situation.
Cool. I love that model of the input output loop. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, one thing I think about is like you stub your toe.
Mm-hmm.
That's an input. There's physical sensation in your
Mm-hmm.
toe. It goes up through the nervous system to your brain.
Mm-hmm.
It gets processed, and then your brain gives you an output, which is usually ow,
Mm-hmm.
that hurt. My toe hurt when I banged it against, the wall or whatever, right?
Right.
Is that kind of
Yes,
an accurate
it
way
is.
of applying that model?
Yes, it's you can think about it that way. And if we're talking about an event like that could cause pain, it is important for people to understand that when you stub your toe, the pain is not created at the location where you stub your toe. So the pain does not start when you make an impact with your toe. What happens is there's a lot of different sensations that occur, and nociception, or a specific kind of nerve ending called a nociceptor, is essentially a threat receptor. So it is monitoring, your every moment for possible danger signals, right? And so you get a lot of nociceptive activity when some kind of small injury event like that happens. And your brain is listening for that nociception. And basically, there's a lot of decision making that happens when you have an event like that. One of the primary kind of decisions that's made by your brain are these danger signals worth paying attention to enough? Right? Because this is where we can get into, like, people have their own unique pain experience. So your pain is not the same as my pain, even if we have a very similar experience or injury event, because it's all perceived. And it's, I don't want that to sound like woo woo, like this is science. Like, your brain is monitoring the environment and both your internal and external body through so many different kinds of sensors or senses. And the result of an event like that, a lot of it comes down to how your brain is perceiving it. Is it dangerous, or is it not dangerous? Is it just stubbing my toe, or is it something more life-threatening, right? And so there's a lot of decision making that goes on based on the type of nociception. And your brain and body actually, or I should say your brain has the ability to essentially squash some of that nociceptive signaling versus let it all through to the cortex for, like, further evaluation, depending on what kind of event it really was. And this is why you can have two people who have a similar experience, maybe with an injury. One person is quite affected by it, and the other person says "ow" and keeps on going. It's interesting how so much of that comes down to perceived threat, and really everything we're going to talk about a lot, it comes down to perceived threat, because that's how the nervous system works. It's essentially constantly monitoring your internal and external body, constantly asking the question, is this safe or not? That's the only question that really matters. And your brain's trying to figure out what is safe. What is safe? And the way that it figures that out is by using all of its different senses. And kind of going back to when we defined applied neuro and I used the word input, it's the quality of the input that actually determines the quality of the output. So that's why we're so into training the senses with applied neuro, because if we can improve the input itself, right? And also we talk about improving the processing as well. If we can improve those things, then we can improve the quality of the output. And that's how we get improvements in movement or decreases in pain. Because guess what? The simple explanation to this, and it will never change, is in doing that, we're making the brain feel safer. And if you can create safety for the nervous system and brain, that's when we generally see pain levels go down and performance go up.
You make a great case for the applied aspect of neurology, and I notice you jump right to that. I did ask about neurology on its own because I do sense within all of this language and all of these models that you're using, that there is this neuroscience, and it's coming from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, other strength and conditioning professionals aren't talking about nociceptors, and so I do kind of want to focus on the neuro half of this for a second, and just kind of ask what is that process like? Like, who's doing that research? What's happening in neurology, and then how is it coming to you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research happening all the time, in the neuroscience world. I personally depend on other people to interpret that. I'm not really, I don't have a high interest in it. I like hearing about it, and it definitely inspires ideas, but I never really learned how to interpret research. And to be honest, once you understand fundamentals of the nervous system, I lost some interest in trying to interpret those results because I would rather be trying things for real. Because when I have the foundations and I understand those neuroanatomy foundations, I can essentially run anything I want through that filter, and the outcome, which means how's the person performing or how are they feeling and how are they moving, that's the ultimate research for me. So I depend on other people to bring that information to me, and I am inspired by it for sure with ideas. But as far as kind of where this applied neuro is coming from, it's important for people to know that functional neurology is actually a degree that you can pursue. So functional neurology is more kind of on the clinical side of things. So if you wanted to be a functional neurologist, you would go this direction, right? If you wanted that formal education to become a functional neurologist and maybe work in a clinic, and typically what you see from functional neurologists, and this certainly isn't everybody, but I think it's probably more common to see functional neurologists working in more of a clinical environment, probably doing things like post-concussion rehabilitation. That's pretty common. And also helping people with like autonomic disorders and, definitely other things too. But you aren't going to go to a functional neurologist necessarily because you have right knee pain that's a 3 out of 10. That's where I come in. You see what I mean? So there's a gap, right? There's always been this gap. And it's this very large gap with people of the general population who are too healthy to receive help in a clinic. And then there's nowhere for them to really go because they've maybe gone a traditional physical therapy route. And let's say that just didn't work for them, or they didn't finish the job, because a lot of times time is a big thing there. And let's say, you get your 12 weeks and then you're done. There's a lot of people within this gap who are just too healthy to receive all the help that they need from the clinical side of things. And so functional neurology has always been there. It's been there for a long time. But applied neurology is now a lot of that information coming through to us now. And we're learning from what had already existed. This is not new. None of this is new. Right. And so we're getting a lot of great insight and information from research that's happened in the functional neurology world. Right. And it's awesome. It's awesome because it's exciting, because before we had this understanding, there really weren't many options. I think back to my own athletic career where all I needed, okay, I mean, I was haunted by elbow pain in high school and college that really disrupted my wrestling career. All I needed was a radial nerve glide. That's it. I didn't even need all the fancy things I know how to do. I just needed to put the nerve under a little tension and move my joints at the same time, and I would have been in a much better place. And I couldn't get that anywhere. All right. I think I told a story a while ago in one of our episodes talking about my background and stuff. And my elbow rehab was doing tricep kickbacks with pink weights. And at that point, I could bench press almost 400 pounds. Okay. And so back then, it just
make them pink though,
it just didn't really work in my mind. I'm like, what is going on? So I'm asking, it's a long time ago, of course. And I'm asking the PT, I'm like, wait a minute. So what are we doing here? Trying to make my triceps stronger? Right. And there was no explanation.
My triceps pretty strong.
It's dude, my triceps are pretty strong, pretty strong. And so there really weren't many options. Now we're starting to get all this great education, right, about the nervous system, at least, how it works fundamentally. And it's our understanding in the actual neuroanatomy that really helps with this. At some point, if you want to be good at applying neurology, you have to know your pathways and structures, and then you have to have a toolkit full of different ideas, and you have to be able to run them through a filter and have at least a decent idea of what part of a person's neurology they're going to target. And the same holds true for testing, because there's a lot of very specific testing we can do to understand a person's function. So yes, it's an exciting time because we're getting access to all this information. And I think the biggest difference is now we're making it so much about function. I mean, anyone who has maybe gone to a neurologist for some reason, not a functional neurologist, but just a neurologist. Well, what do I mean, I hear from these people daily. People are DMing me constantly, looking for help and trying to, they want me to point them in a direction. And I hear the same stories all the time. I saw a neurologist. They said everything was fine, and they sent me on my way, meaning I met the standard of whatever they think the standard is for health. However, it didn't give me any answers for any of the symptoms I'm experiencing. Okay, so there's that kind of person who's too healthy to get help from, a clinic, or people go that route, and the neurologist takes them through basic tests. You would think you're getting high level stuff when you go clinical. No. Basic, generalized neurologic testing. And then if there is a potential issue, people get taken down a road of, well, this drug could help you with your symptoms. And so then people are just kind of throwing their arms up in the air if they don't want to necessarily be medicated for an issue. It's well, why am I seeing a neurologist for this? Functional neurology is then different because a good functional neurologist is focused on function, which means they have better neurologic tests and they're focused on the output, just like I was describing. They want the whatever they do with a person, they want to then see better outcomes, right? Whether it's decreased pain or improving some issue with concussion symptoms or autonomics. So that's a big step in the right direction. And then, as I said, kind of the next, layer to that is more of like a coach like me. And we are also very focused on function, applying a stimulus and seeing what does it actually do for the person.
Yeah, I'm almost seeing a pyramid, and at the top there's the neurologist, and it's if you have a brain tumor, you go see this person.
Right.
And then, like you were saying, if you have a concussion, you might go to the clinic and see the functional neurologist.
Right.
And then if you have balance issues that nobody has really figured out, but you've done the scans and you don't have a tumor and it's not anything that they can see, maybe you go to the applied neurologist who can run some tests and figure out maybe your vestibular system needs some
Yes.
stimulating.
Yes. I always tell people, because they're like, oh, they named all the people you just named.
Yeah.
And they're like, and no one can find anything wrong. And I'm like, that is excellent news.
Yeah.
That is excellent news. Do you want to know why? Because now you're in my world. Okay. You got this thing called a threat bucket. It's overflowing with threat. It's causing your symptoms. Let's now start working on you as a whole and not necessarily focusing on a symptom to decrease threat. And then this will decrease your pain and help you move better through the world. So when they can't find anything, that's great news, because now I feel like it's easy to get started. And that is where people fall into a trap, because so many people, and this is just because of lack of education, it's not anyone's fault, but it's a lack of education. People are searching for a diagnosis because the general population as a whole thinks a diagnosis, a label to the pain or the symptoms that they're having, means that somebody knows what it is and therefore there's a solution. And that is not what a diagnosis is. A diagnosis is more of a name that somebody comes up with to tag the symptoms that you have. But the symptoms that you have are symptoms generally coming from maybe one or many other issues. So there's a trap there for people, right? And so if you go that route and nothing is wrong on paper, that's excellent news. Now you have to not fall into that trap. And you have to understand that, yes, there are professionals that can help you, that you can seek out. They're hard to find. You know, we're still in a place right now where they're hard to find. But you now have the ability to take so much of this into your own hands. And that's kind of, again, where I come in, because I'm all about empowering the person to have tools that they can use to help themselves. And in applied neurology in this setting it's phenomenal. It can really, really catapult people into a big result who have been struggling and not really finding answers.
Yeah. So you started this conversation talking about this input-output loop. Could you give us just like a concise, simple example of that in an applied neurology context, like as an intervention?
Yeah. So meaning what is like an example of the actual input?
Yeah, an example of like something that you would do and the mental model, that the neuroanatomy that you're kind of accessing, and just something accessible that we can, use to put a face to the name, right?
Okay. Yeah. So let me start with kind of creating one that is hopefully more relatable for somebody who is kind of just getting into all this. So most people who are fitness enthusiasts or have been looking for information, things that they can do to help their body feel better, at some point have tried something that actually helped them feel better. So for example, some popular things, right? Some people will say roll the bottom of your foot, right? So get a lacrosse ball, roll the bottom of your foot. And if you've never had this experience before, you might have sore feet from running, or you might have a case of plantar fasciitis, and you decide to take someone's advice and roll the bottom of your foot with a lacrosse ball. And, it hurts so good kind of thing. Yeah. You can kind of dig in, and it can be a little uncomfortable, or you can keep it kind of light and maybe you think it feels good. And then, you do that for, let's say, a minute, and you get up and you walk around. At this point, maybe not even because you expected a result, but you had to get up and do something. And then you think, oh, that's so weird. My foot feels better. And come to think of it, my low back's not as tight, right? Well, that's because you just practiced applied neurology, right? You just did not expect to have a result, and you're not sure why you had a result. And so your mind starts going crazy, and you start thinking very logically, like, okay, what did that ball do? Well, while I was rolling my foot, it hurt. Okay. So I must have been breaking up scar tissue, right? Or, whatever. It's very common for people to think this way.
Or when just, they do working out knots is a common.
Yeah. We're working out a knot. We're breaking up scar tissue. We're doing something, because people get very mechanically minded because they don't understand the neurology piece yet. And it makes sense that if I were to use force on my body, I must have changed something, and therefore I'm moving differently. And so that might be where someone sort of has that experience, and that's sort of what they decide happened, right? And that's probably not what happened, right? But it is applied neurology. So rolling the bottom of your foot with some sort of tool is a sensory stimulus, right? So you have taken a tool, you've applied it to the skin, you've done like a massage on the muscles and connective tissues in the bottom of your foot, and we have nerve endings that are sensitized by all of that movement. That's how we differentiate between certain feelings, like light touch versus deep touch, something that starts to balance the line of uncomfortable. Now maybe we're getting some nociception. And this is all triggering different receptors because we have lots of different kinds of nerve endings that are dedicated to helping us feel different types of sensation. If you're barefoot and you feel that the ground is cold or warm, or maybe you're standing on gravel and it feels rough and it kind of hurts sometimes versus sand, like these are all sensations that or experiences of how we're feeling things that change based on all these nerve endings that are activated. And so we have information that's being taken in by those receptors, and then by way of like peripheral nerves, that information is now traveling a nerve, eventually arriving at the spinal cord. Depending on the type of sensation that it is, kind of dictates what part of the spinal cord it will actually travel on its way to the brain. And eventually it will arrive at the brain, and there's a lot of different parts of the brain involved in sensory processing. And in the end, if you are rolling your right foot, a lot of that sensory input that's taken in is going to be processed in the left part of the hemisphere, in the left cortex. So all of that sensory input is doing something, right, as far as the brain is concerned. And as we kind of, when we start talking about the neurology of movement and brain activation patterns, people can start to learn about how muscle tone is affected by any kind of sensory input like that. We have a whole podcast episode on it called The Neurology of Movement. If people want to go listen to that one as well. Because the changes in muscle tone are a really very important thing for us, especially for me as a movement guy. And all of that is happening as the eventual outcome to the applied stimulus. So rolling the lacrosse ball in the bottom of the foot in the moment is not likely doing what you think it might be doing to your tissue if we're thinking mechanically. Okay? But it is doing something for your nervous system. And then how your nervous system and brain perceive that input dictate what the outcome is actually going to be. And this comes back to threat perception, because you could take 10 people and say, hey, I want everybody to roll their right foot on the lacrosse ball. And maybe 5 of them get a great response. Their hamstring feels looser. Their heel pain goes away. They're walking better. And then another 5 people go, that's weird. My hamstring feels tighter. Or when I bend over, I don't go as far. Like, what's up with that? Right. And that kind of now is getting into everybody responds in their own unique way to a stimulus to some degree. Right. So it's all about threat perception. Was there something threatening about that stimulus? Or was it novel? Did it activate a group of receptors that your brain really was in need of getting some activation to? Because that's a part of this too, right? We can sometimes have sensory needs, and when we start figuring out what they are, we can start applying the missing sensation and getting some really amazing results. That then goes into testing. So applied neurology, when done thoroughly, is based off of neurologic assessments that you can run to figure out, okay, what do we actually need here? What is the brain in need of? Okay, so that is hopefully a little bit more relatable for people out there that have tried rolling the bottom of their foot and were like, hey, that's awesome. That helped me.
Yeah, I kind of want to go do it right now.
Yeah, and it can be a good tool, right? It's a sensory stimulus. So we could then take that idea and essentially insert so many different kinds of inputs or stimuli into that. Okay, and so this is now where you have to understand that as humans, we have so many different kinds of senses. People are familiar with the basics, right? Taste, touch, hearing, right? That kind of thing. Even proprioception, right? People are familiar with this stuff. But there's a lot of other senses that we don't necessarily associate with movement. But it all matters because how well a person moves and the level of threat that they're experiencing or the level of pain that they're experiencing is really all based on this cumulative, kind of this sum total of sensory inputs that are eventually all being sort of merged together and compared with one another. And your brain is trying to figure out, can I trust this information enough? Is it accurate? Is it accurate? And if it is, and the sensory input is high quality, well, the result of that is usually improved performance and decreased pain. And I mean immediately. That's what's so neat about applied neurology, is you apply the stimulus, right? And then you get to see, what did it do? And I mean, you get to see, what did it do immediately, which is a really fun way to work for both the coach and the client, because you're getting a lot of clues along the way. And you also can apply a stimulus and not get the result that you were hoping for, or even get a regression, which then gets into the humbling part of this work. Kind of like when I started doing it and trying things that I thought were healthy for people. I thought they were going to be good exercises, good inputs. And then I learned through testing, no, they weren't. For whatever reason, the brain and nervous system found that stimulus threatening, right? So it works both ways. But being able to immediately reassess, it's fantastic because it gives you really great clues, and it really helps you be confident that you're moving in the right direction with what you're doing.
Yeah, that's something that I think took me a little bit of coming around to is in the strength and conditioning world. I feel like or even in the physical therapy world, it seems like it's a lot of it's about like progression over time. Like, I'm going to make this stronger over the course of this 8-week program, or I have this goal, and in 2 years, if I keep doing this progressive training, I will get to this point.
Right.
And applied neurology works on a completely different time scale. And
yes.
I think that's something that causes suspicion. It's like, what do
Big
you
time.
mean I can, roll the bottom of my foot and my back will instantly feel better? Like, what?
Exactly.
That just sounds like voodoo.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought this up, because this is going to be the biggest challenge for getting this information out there for the rest of time that we're trying, because of what you said. That brings up that suspicion, because people are very familiar with progressive overload, right? If you're into strength training or you're an athlete, you know that practice over time of something specific is going to give you a result that is specific to your goal, right? And we're very familiar with that. And the adaptations that take place over time, like literal physiologic adaptations, like your tissue's changing and adapting to whatever it is that you are doing, okay? And people are familiar with that. And applied neuro, like you said, it's different. It works on a different time scale, in the sense that we are interested in what the outcome is immediately, so that we can use it as a clue. And that's what's so neat about the nervous system, is that when you understand that your brain and nervous system is using all the different senses all the time and monitoring every moment, you realize that you can ask the brain a very important question with everything that you do, and that's, is this safe or not? Or how do you perceive this input? And you can get the answer to that question within seconds. And that's the change in output. So, because the nervous system's constantly adapting to the experience, that's what gives us great clues that we're doing something that needs to be done, right? Or not. Sometimes it shows us, hey, this isn't the right thing, right? I don't want to send my client home for 12 weeks of practice of an exercise that's causing their nervous system threat, right? We don't want that if we want long-term results. And so this is an important distinction to make and thing to clarify, because people who are suspicious of this, they're labeling applied neuro as hacks, right? And a lot of these folks actually understand that the nervous system responds to any given stimulus. But because of that, and because they're so familiar with progressive overload over time, it's very difficult for them to wrap their mind around, how could this not be nervous system tricks? And my response to that is, it's not hacks, it's not tricks, unless you don't know what to do next. That's what it all comes down to. We're harnessing the power of a result that's happening in the moment. And if you don't know what to do next, you probably are wasting your time, right? And then it starts to look like a trick. Okay. And so this is now, we're starting to see some separations take place in the industries, because neurology is starting to make its way into lots of different spaces. Okay. And some of these spaces are more, a lot of it time it's called like nervous system regulation. Okay. This is kind of a new kind of evolving space that I'm starting to see. And the education that you see based around nervous system regulation is actually quite good. It's all based on threat perception, which I think is great. The application is not close yet when you look at how they're using it, because the problem is, and this is going to hurt applied neurology for a bit until we get past this. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's going to take some time, because we're sort of getting past the whole accusation of this is nervous system tricks. We're sort of getting past that now, right? Now we're into nervous system regulation, which means, hey, try this thing and watch your nervous system reset or relax, or
the vagus nerve reset.
Yeah, your anxiety disappear. From what? From stretching your tongue. Right? I see this on Instagram constantly now. It's like, come on, I used to be the tongue stretch guy. Like, where was everybody 12 years ago when I was stretching tongues? Like, now everybody's stretching their tongue, and you should see the explanations they have for what it's doing. Oh my gosh, it's wild. But some people have it, some people get it. But the point I'm trying to make is, hey, stretch your tongue to fix your anxiety. Stretch your tongue to release yourself from emotional trauma. Stretch your tongue to, whatever. It's just, and it's more of like, try this activation, right? And yes, it may help you feel better and move better. That is fact, right? When you apply a strong stimulus to the brain and nervous system, there's always an eventual outcome. Right. So it's not that something like that is not going to help. Right. There's usually some sort of performance, measure we can look at. It might not help. That goes back to perceived threat. Right. So some people say, okay, it's supposed to help. Right. And they don't test it. Okay. So they're not testing. So they don't know, okay, is this the necessary stimulus or not? I'm not sure. We're just stretching tongues here because it's supposed to help with this thing. Yeah. So without a test, it is a guess. And I have thoughts on that too, because I actually think it's perfectly okay to guess sometimes, because I don't ever want someone to feel like they need 15 years of applied neurology understanding and education to be able to apply the material. I think guessing is okay as long as you're using good judgment and you know to reassess your outcome. But I'm just pointing out some things here, mainly for the practitioners. If you're not testing, you're kind of guessing. So we can do better than that because we do understand enough about the nervous system to be able to test and understand what is the stimulus that we really need. And the application is not there yet because applying a stimulus like that, when you feel you need it, if that's what you're calling kind of nervous system regulation, is not the same as training. Okay, so the work that I'm doing and that I'm teaching people how to do is based on figuring out what type of stimulus is needed and why. We test to figure out the answer to that. Then we apply by going through sometimes a large variety of different drills, looking for the ones that are giving us the desired result. Then we do something with that. Instead of walk away from it and say, well, next week when my neck pain flares up again, I might pull this out of the toolbox. Sure, I'm not saying that's wrong because it's good to have tools like that you can call on. But in the grand scheme of things, with what we're doing, we're trying to figure out how do we train this thing so that we can teach our brain how to own the result and create some plasticity around what we're doing. So it's a difference of rather than regulating, trying to regulate or reset, which is some of the terminology you hear about the nervous system, we're figuring out what is the need of the nervous system and how can we train it for the same reason we would approach any athletic skill or fitness goal, right? I should say the same way. Progressive practice and exposure to the stimulus over time will help us achieve that goal, whether it's decreasing pain, improving mobility. So there's overlap here with the progressive, overload type of principles, because I'm saying this is important for people to hear. And this is, again, you use the word suspicion, and I like that. It's good for people to be suspicious of it too. I was when I first started. It's important for people to know that we have to train this stuff to make it better. But weird things happen all the time that are honestly outside of our understanding at times. And what I mean by that is, like, the other day I had right shoulder pain. And I had to do an Instagram post, and I was being lazy about my right shoulder pain. I've been doing more sort of body weight gymnastic type exercise lately, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to get back on the gymnastics rings. It's been years. So I started doing some of that, and I developed a little right shoulder pain. Nothing wild, just a little bit, enough to make me go, maybe I shouldn't do the rings today. So I had to do an Instagram post, and I thought, why don't I put together a little stack here, a little stack of, neurology drills, which is different applied, ideas. And I went through some ideas, and I found one that made my pain go from like a 4 to a 0. Okay. And it was a combination of things. It was a left radial nerve glide, which is already weird because my right shoulder hurts, right? So I was tensioning the nerve on the left. I then had some glasses on that we call like occlusion glasses, which basically I put tape on the lenses. In the way it's a whole thing that we get into in our courses. I'm not going to go into the details now, but based on where we put tape on the lenses, we can actually activate part of the brain and inhibit part of the brain. And so I had those glasses on with tape on them, so that looked weird. And then I had a silicone straw in my mouth, and I was biting it on the right side. So I was activating like my muscles for chewing.
Trigeminal.
Yeah, trigeminal. There you go. So all these three things I had put together to create a stronger stimulus that then gave me the immediate outcome of no shoulder pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I put that up on Instagram and shared a little bit about it. And, the majority of people love it. They're like, I love your content. It's incredible. And then you have people that are like, this guy's a total clown. Like, where does he get this garbage? This isn't even real. I get that constantly, which is funny to me now. It's just like, okay, my shoulder pain's gone. You still have yours.
Yeah.
So, and so where I was going with this whole thing is my shoulder pain's gone. It's gone. I did that twice and it's gone. And that's not always the goal. I should say, like, it's not the expectation. I thought, okay, here's a good drill for me, and maybe I'll have to practice this a couple times a day for a week, and then I'll be in good shape. But I didn't. It's actually was just gone. And that happens more than you would think. And so that also raises suspicion for some people because no one's ever seen that before.
Right.
It's totally like people, they're in this mindset because maybe they've had an experience where they had an injury or they had chronic pain, and it's taken them 3 months, 6 months, 6 years or more to get out of chronic pain, or they're still in chronic pain, and so they never seen anything like that. But that is how powerful the right drills can be. And so sometimes it does work like that. And when it does, it's, we slap high fives and it's great and it's exciting. And we might not be able to fully explain what really happened, right? Because it seemed like that was a really necessary stimulus. The brain liked it. And we're able to go on with what we want to do without the shoulder pain. And other times it takes training. And it takes training at the same intensity and frequency that you would expect from an athlete who has a specific athletic goal. Or if you've ever been focused on a fitness goal and you wanted to improve, let's say the amount of pull-ups you could do. Well, you're not necessarily going to improve the amount of pull-ups you can do without doing pull-ups, at least a bit, right? Sure, there's maybe other things we could do that could transfer a little bit, but really you got to do pull-ups, right? So it's important for me to help people understand that what could be labeled as or look as a hack or a protocol or something like that, because there's a fast result involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the whole picture. And I've been trying my best now on Instagram to provide content to our followers with more education of how applied neurology works versus only make it about, hey, do this weird thing and your pain goes away. Because if you look at the comments in my Instagram posts and stuff, it's insane. I mean, people are doing a vision drill and years of pain is vanishing and never coming back. And these are common conversations happening in the comments. And I think it's awesome because the goal of the page is to help as many people as possible for free.
Right.
That's the goal of the page. So that's great. And I'm not going to stop that. But people who are wanting to know more about like the actual theory behind it, I'm now trying to do longer form content on Instagram, which is really funny because, so for example, I usually average about 7 minutes on these videos on Instagram.
Yeah,
and when I go to post them, yeah, that's like
an eternity.
Dude, if you want a good way to not get people to view your content, do that. But the goal is education. It's always been education as one of the main things we're interested in. So I'll make these videos now that share some of the theory and some of the application. They're 7 minutes long. And when I go to post them, Instagram gives me a pop-up that says, just so you know, your video's over 3 minutes, and we are not going to share this with any new audience or much of yours. But I just post it anyways. And I get a lot of engagement on them. So I know people are enjoying it, and I'm just going to keep going. But that's part of my effort to help people understand that it's not just, it's not hacks and protocols and just, and the expectation is not let's get the pain to vanish with one repetition of one drill. I just chuckle and remind people that happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's just that I'm not expecting it every time it happens, but it doesn't get old and it's kind of cool when it does.
So with that shoulder pain example, I could see I don't know how it was for you, but I could see a situation where you might do all of those things, the occlusion glasses and the biting on the straw on the one side and the radial nerve glide for the
Yep.
left arm, and then your right shoulder pain goes away.
Yes.
And then you can train that right shoulder with a traditional kettlebell press or
Yep.
something like that,
Yes.
that you weren't able to do before. And so maybe it's buying you some time so that you can then build resilience to do those things again, and then not have to rely on the applied neuro later.
Totally. I'm glad you brought that up. That is, when it works like that, that's a perfect scenario. Doesn't happen like that all the time, but when it does, that's great. So when you can reduce threat and get that kind of result like I did, where, yeah, I don't have right shoulder pain, I now have an opportunity to do even more healthier things locally to that body part.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's needed, right? If sometimes we have to have restorative work done on a body area because of a past injury or many injuries, a history to go with it, a surgery. There's lots of different factors that go into that. And using applied neuro and having an experience like that where pain is reduced dramatically right away, that's a great scenario, because now you're possibly able to do more localized work with that body area without paying a price for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great when that happens. And that's one of the basic ways that we are encouraging people to use the material just like that.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight was you mentioned testing assessments. We do have an entire episode or episodes about assessments as well.
Yep.
So feel free to always go back in the backlog of this podcast. There's so many topics we discuss and very specific applications of things that we discuss in passing. But, you were talking about neurological regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And how they might say, hey, do this thing where you stretch your tongue and you'll feel better.
Right.
The difference that I'm getting from what you just described is, with applied neurology, you would say, I have a theory that if you do this stretch with your tongue, it will activate the parasympathetic nerve and you will feel better.
Yes.
But what I'm going to do is have you do it and then assess whether that's actually true or not.
Correct.
And I feel like the assessment's the part that's missing from the other methodology. Is that?
Yeah, often, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a big thing that's missing, the testing and the assessing. A lot of times people are just assuming that the result is going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah.
This is the humbling part of applied neuro that makes it challenging for people at first when they're learning, is that you're faced with a scary truth, right? Especially if you've been using a certain methodology for a long time. Maybe you've even based your entire business off a single methodology. And you'll start to learn applied neuro, and you start learning assessing and reassessing, and you get some frightening feedback. And that frightening feedback is, what I just did for my client made them worse. Okay, I remember what it was like to go through this. Yeah. And it's both exciting and scary at the same time. And it's exciting for those people who want the truth of, what is this work actually doing for the person in front of me? Because I remember what it was like before learning neuro, and I was not assessing essentially anything. I did a little bit of, put it this way, the type of assessments that I did were movement screens. So you look at how a person is moving, and then you put together, let's say, a 6-week, 12-week or more program with exercises, and then you retest that movement screen every 6 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, and you're trying to, see results. That's the type of testing that I did sometimes as more of a fitness coach before applied neuro. And that's good. That's good. But when you learn applied neuro, it turns all that upside down instantly. And, you have experiences where you think you were doing the right thing, and you actually learn that the tool that you've been using and maybe you've been recommending to a lot of people or you've been using on a lot of people, you're actually getting a lot of negative responses from it.
Mm-hmm.
That also happened to me early on when Alicia and I were into it was a type of fascial stretch therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different kind of fascial stretch kind of techniques out there. This was just one of them that we really put a lot of time and effort into learning. And as I started to get into applied neuro, I couldn't help myself, but then start to assess my clients' response to the fascial work that we were doing. And it was a very challenging point in our career because we essentially were learning over and over again that we were overdosing the heck out of people and they were getting worse all the time. And, to be in that position where you've built kind of a business around a single methodology, and then you're learning something new and your experience becomes your truth, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, full stop. What are we missing here?
Yeah.
And so it's challenging for people at first to kind of get through that part, but then it's extremely exciting because once you start learning neuroanatomy and you start understanding how the brain and nervous system responds to inputs, you start understanding things about dose. You're able to run so many different methodologies or tools through a filter and understand why they're helping somebody or why they're not helping somebody. It's very empowering. It's very fun, and you get much better results, which is obviously the end goal.
Yeah. Revisiting that definition that you gave us earlier, if I were to paraphrase based on this conversation, I would say something like applied neurology is making educated guesses about what somebody needs to reduce threat to the nervous system, applying a stimulus, letting it go through that input-output loop. So you apply a stimulus, you touch the knee, you massage the ankle, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Goes into the brain, gets processed by the brain, comes out, and then assessing the output of that stimulus. Did the nervous system relax? Do you feel better? Is your pain worse or better? Is your mobility worse or better? Did it do anything at all? And then going through that many times to figure out what consistently works for someone,
right,
and makes them feel better so that they can then train, work on their goals, and live a better, less painful, more mobile life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's great. What's interesting is a lot of people are already practicing applied neurology, but they don't know it. Yet. It's kind of interesting, and that's also what I try to help. I try to help people who are genuinely interested in this work, but also those flags of suspicion have been raised because it's just so different, and they're seeing all these weird things.
It's the glasses mostly, man.
Yeah, exactly. Wait till you see what I put on Instagram in a couple weeks. I'm gonna make some. I'm gonna make some actual do-it-yourself hemifields where each lens is split. 50% difference in each side is a different color.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They're really neat. But a lot of people are practicing applied neuro and they don't know it. And the reason I say that is because, like, for example, you take any kind of personal trainer or strength coach or something, and you could just say, well, do you have your athletes and clients warm up? And they'll all probably say, yeah. Well, if you ask them why, most of them, if they're, educated coaches, are probably going to give you quite a long list of reasons that go beyond just, I want the person's body temperature to go up. Right? So there's reasons, and people know, like, warming up has advantages so that what you do next, right, is easier, or you're more dialed into it. And this is this idea of, I think, what some people would refer to as potentiation. where it's a known thing in fitness and strength and conditioning that if you do a good warm up, whatever that exercise might be, maybe it's foam rolling, right? At the most basic level. Maybe it's a thoracic spine mobility drill, right? You can ask any good coach, well, why are you doing that to start? And they're probably going to say, well, I noticed that when they did that thoracic spine mobility drill, and then I brought them over to the squat rack, they got into the squat position better. Guess what? You just applied neurology.
Mm-hmm.
And you did assess it.
Yeah.
So
the output was how was their squat position?
Positional change.
Yeah.
Right. And people experience this all the time. And coaches are getting good, and there's a lot of education available to them. It's not presented in the same way that we're presenting it, but that's good work. So you used proprioception through movement and maybe through a sensory type of stimulus. And sure, it was combined, right? It wasn't super thorough, but I'm not saying it has to be.
Right.
And then you noticed, well, there was some improvement afterward. And that is the same thing as applied neurology. Now, here's one of the reasons why the type of applied neurology we're teaching people how to use actually goes to a place where results can be really incredible for a wide variety of reasons: pain reduction, changes in autonomics, changes in position, improvements in movement. Think about it this way. If our listeners can kind of visualize this, if your brain and nervous system is constantly trying to monitor both your internal and external environment, it's doing so with, let's say, satellites. Or maybe you could visualize a submarine using sonar, right? The submarine can't really see where it's going, but it uses sonar to understand and understand its environment and where is it going. Okay, satellites, however you want to think about it, are relaying information back to somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so let's just kind of think about it that way. If our brain and nervous system is using satellites to relay information back to us, those satellites, we're going to say, are the nerve endings, perhaps, that we talked about in the bottom of the foot when we talked about rolling the bottom of the foot. But there are satellites for other systems. So there are satellites for your eyes. There are satellites for your inner ear. Okay, there's tons of different senses. We could use hearing. We could use taste. We could use function of different cranial nerves. So many things we can look at here, and so many different types of receptors available to us. Okay, the biggest difference between the work I'm doing with applied neurology versus maybe the more fundamental kind that I just described, where you do a thoracic spine drill and then you see an improvement in squatting, the biggest difference is I have access to more satellites. That's it. That's the difference. And so I'm teaching people what those satellites are.
Yeah. And this is where cool things like visual drills come in.
Yes.
Or
exactly.
Vestibular training.
Exactly. Because all of that information is involved in movement. Your brain is using information from all the different senses to understand, is something safe, right? And it's how is it perceived, right? So I have access to more satellites. But it's not just me. I'm showing people what exists through those receptors. And then I'm helping people understand the neuroanatomy behind it so that you can activate one of those satellites with a goal, because you know where that input is going to go. That's another big difference. So we might choose a specific vision exercise because we are trying to target an area of the brainstem. And we might be trying to target an area of the brainstem because we're trying to inhibit pain, or we're trying to increase or decrease flexor or extensor muscle tone. This is literally how deep it starts to go. And that's what's so neat about this is you can pick and choose like what you want to do and why, and based off neuro assessments, you get clues as to what inputs might be the best. Then you choose those satellites, send the information, and then, like we've been talking about, see what the outcome is, because that is the truth. That's why the anatomy is cool and all. Like, I love the neuroanatomy and learning neuroanatomy, but in the end, the only truth is what happened.
Yeah. Did my shoulder feel better after I chewed on that straw?
Exactly. And guess what? It's perceived again. This is where, at some point when you get good at this work, you have to be okay with this part and how weird the brain is. It is true that if you, like my experiences, I have an idea of different exercises and stuff being good for certain things, right? And that, like, for example, I'm going to teach our free masterclass on the 17th. And we're going to do a couple things at the beginning. And I know about 70% of people are going to get better from the first thing we do. And we'll see that in the chat box. And I know that the rest of people are going to either have no change or they're going to get worse, right? And I use this opportunity to educate people that everybody responds differently to a stimulus.
Right.
But I do know that most of the time it's going to be about 70% of people that get better. And that's typically what I find with so much of this stuff. And that's because what we know about neuroanatomy is good enough to get us there. But then in the end, the rest is perceived. And the way that we perceive a stimulus is based on tons of different things. It's not even just your sensory systems. It can be memory. It can be experiences. It can be cultural factors.
It can be fuel.
So fuel, how you were brought up. I mean, tons of stuff, right? Because it's a brain, right? And brains are weird, and your brain and nervous system is a whole ecosystem, right? It's not an automobile. So, yeah, man, it's fun.
It is fun.
It is.
It is fun. I've definitely been really enjoying learning about this stuff with you.
You've picked it up fast. It's been fun to watch.
I can fake it on a podcast.
All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Let me make a couple of announcements here. We're getting close to game time here. So right now, if you have not already gone and watched my free neuro masterclass, definitely go and do that. We have an enrollment period coming at the end of the month. So if you have even a little bit of interest in trying to understand whether or not our courses are something that would be a good fit for you, go watch the masterclass. That'll put you on our email list. Then you will receive information about our enrollment process. And this is a good opportunity for you to go a little bit deeper into the neuro and kind of have a real-time experience that will go with what you just learned in this episode. As far as the courses go, it's a really great time to get involved right now. At the beginning of March, so the first week of March, I will be starting to teach our Neuro Foundations course. And the unique thing about it now in the spring is that this is the live version of it. So if you are really, excited about getting into our courses, now is the time to do that, because if you take the Foundations course in March, you'll be live with me to do that. And then comes September, when we then have our advanced course, the Neuro Dojo, I'm live to teach that one too. And our curriculum is designed to run people through both courses. So if you're really excited about it and you want to take both live, now is the time to start. So make sure you check out the masterclass, get on our email list so that you can, stay up to date with the pulse on what's happening behind the scenes in our enrollment. And I look forward to having you guys in the masterclass and hopefully even in our courses. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon.